A very good afternoon and welcome to all our audiences on different platforms to this interesting talk as part of the IVDR Celebration Week, where we at Medidia, at Global Regulatory Services, and all our resource partners want you to be hashtag IVDR ready. So, well, in today's session, I have alongside with me my company director and co-founder of Global Regulatory Services, Mrs. Greer Deal, who is quite a stalwart in this entire sector of regulatory affairs, especially in the life science industry. And not to forget, she has nearly 15 plus years of experience in the medtech regulatory space. So, in today's session, we are going to talk about an overview of IVDR to know more on what's going on, what has happened, and what will be coming into place soon. Do not forget, IVDR is going to be in action from 26th May 2022. And as a part of demystifying all the different doubts around this IVD regulations, Medidia and GRS, along with the resource partners, have brought this IVD regulation, IVDR celebration week, and we will help you be IVDR ready. So let's move into the session. And hello, Greer, how are you keeping today?
Hi, Jane. Thank you very much for this opportunity to talk to everyone this afternoon. It's all going good here. Thank you very much. So I'm raring to go.
All right. I guess it was quite an interesting one in the opening ceremony today in the morning, where Angus Burns from Galway Chamber and, of course, Akhilesh Mishra, Indian ambassador to Ireland, both gave a keynote address. And I'm sure our audiences got a quick drill into what's coming up with IVD regulations. And today we will now talk specifically about the regulations and how is the regulatory strategy need to be amended. So before we start with the specific questions, I wanted you to help our audience understand better about what does Medidia and what does GRS do, and how can we be helpful in the entire IVDR transition journey for the companies.
Yeah, thank you, Jay. So I think it is important to sort of provide a bit of background into the companies based on our experience and knowledge. So Global Regulatory Services is the parent company, and that was established 16 years ago with a focus on regulatory affairs and quality compliance. It is across the whole of the life sciences, and the clue's in the name, it is global. So we have in-country expertise as well as having the technical, scientific and regulatory know-how. Now, because of the massive changes in technology with medtech, so devices, diagnostics and digital health, we wanted to be able to provide expertise that focus purely on everything to do with medtech. So we actually spun out Medidia a few years ago with dedicated consultants here ready and waiting and doing lots of work in this medtech space. And they focus on regulatory affairs, quality compliance, but very much medtech and the borderline devices, which could be between fitness, wellness, and being medical. So, and through Medidia, also, we're able to provide the services of EU authorised representative, person responsible for regulatory compliance, and clinical trial legal representative as well. But we can go into that in more detail later. So really, these sessions all this week, it's because it's IVD diagnostics. Medidia is very much the focus with regards to the regulatory regulations and quality compliance. But Medidia is supported and powered by Global Regulatory Services, GRS for short. So if companies want to go beyond Europe, beyond the US, we can bring the expertise and the network from GRS to support our colleagues in Medidia in order to launch our clients' products to the rest of the world. Thanks, Jay.
Yeah, that's interesting. And of course, not to forget, like IVDR Celebration Week is brought to you all by Medidia and Global Regulatory Services, but we have additional resource partners who are also working simultaneously with us and our experts to bring this quality sessions to you all. So not to forget, our resource partner includes Galway Chamber, Middlink Midlands, Fortieri Development, Xenon Health Solutions, GS1 Ireland, Health and Innovation Hub Ireland, Embassy of India, Dublin, Ireland. And yes, all of us together want to make sure that you, the innovators, and the diagnostic manufacturers are hashtag IVDR ready. Okay, let's dive in straight. But before we move to the regulatory side of it, there are some audiences who do not have any idea what exactly is an IVD medical device. What is in vitro diagnostic device? So, would you please let our audiences know what are the different examples of in vitro diagnostic devices?
Okay, so I think it is much easier to explain, by giving examples what a diagnostic is, rather than giving you the blurb from the regulation itself, which is all very legal speak, as I say. So a diagnostic, and this is for human use, okay, they range from things like your pregnancy test, which is used at home. Of course, everyone knows about COVID, so the COVID tests, they're diagnostics. If you want to know what your blood group is, are you A, O, then that's the diagnostic, an IVD. But also you have the very low risk classifications, so things that are used in laboratories and receptacles. So that, the receptacles that take the blood, then they are part of a diagnostic. So it's pretty varied.
Yes, definitely. And you did mention something about classification. So, how can we classify different IVD medical devices?
Yeah, so this is where there's a massive change from the old directives moving into the regulations. So previously it was very much on a list-based approach. So if your type of diagnostic was listed in the directive, then you could work out the risk classification. And risk is determined by risk to human health, basically, or to the clinicians who are using the diagnostic. So, but under the regulation, it's become more like medical device classifications. So there are four classifications, and again, all on risk, and they go from A, B, C, and D. A being the lowest risk, and lowest risk means that you can self-declare. You don't need to engage with a notified body who acts on behalf of the competent authorities. So, but you still need to comply with the regulations, but the emphasis is very much on the legal manufacturer to declare to everyone that they are compliant, and they could be inspected at any time. So examples of, under the new regulation, examples of a Class A, which is a self-declaration, would be like what I was mentioning before, your lab instruments or the receptacles that contain the fluids. Class B, which is where you would start to need to engage with a notified body because it's a higher risk classification, are things like your thyroid function tests, your pregnancy tests. And this is where the risk is moderate to the individual, or it's low public health risk. So, and then your Class C, which is going up the risk classifications, are things like your genetic tests, and also those tests where you're testing compatibility for someone who's going to have a blood transfusion or an organ transplant. So that risk classification is where it's a moderate risk to the individual, but it's still a low public health risk. Okay, I hope you're keeping up with me. And then you've got the next risk classification, which is Class C, and that's high individual risk and moderate public health risk, or moderate public health risk. So that's Class C. So yeah, and then Class D is your highest risk classification. So that's high risk to the individual and high public health risk. Okay, and this is where the shift is, because under the directive, your COVID diagnostic tests were self-declared overall, not all of them, but most of them. Whereas under the new regulation, they actually fall into the high individual risk and the high public health risk. Everyone can understand the high public health risk. So, but it becomes high risk for the individual if they have to do it at home, because they're not in a clinical setting and there's no control over how they actually use the diagnostic. They're very reliant on the information for use, the directions on how to use it, and then posting it to a lab to do the actual diagnostic aspect of it. So there is a high risk of things going completely wrong because it's the individual who's untrained in how to use the diagnostic, and there are so many unknowns and so many areas that are out of control of the legal manufacturer. So that's why it's high risk.
That's quite interesting because, of course, how this entire classification works around different risk and how it is interpreted differently. I'm sure manufacturers might often get it wrong. So definitely, it is now a time for them to engage with us, possibly, or maybe with some similar regulatory and overall big partners who would help them understand what different risk classification applies to their particular innovation. And yes.
And just sorry, Jay, just to add to that with the regulation, the old directives, you had to look to see if your diagnostic was actually listed. But the new regulation, you've got these implementing rules and classifications within the regulation. So everybody needs to revisit their intended purpose statement to see how it's affected by these new rules. So it's rule-based now rather than list-based.
Okay. I'm sure that our members of our audience who are listening to us right now are making their notes and pointing it down. And definitely, if they have any questions, feel free to drop them on mdd@mddltd.com, and our experts will be there to help you out with it. So, Greer, you also mentioned something about MDD, that is Medical Device Directives. And last year, around same dates, I guess 26th May 2021, we saw the transition of medical device regulations, that is MDR, and a lot of things were moving around it. So, but IVDR didn't come during the same date. So there have been significant changes in the implementation timeline of IVD regulations. What were the main causes of this shift? Why was it? Why didn't it come out directly with MDR? And Why was there a delay?
Okay, so the not exactly a delay, but the medical device sector were used to operating in a more regulated environment. So the governments, the authorities determined that the medical device sector wouldn't need as long to transition from the old directives to the regulations because it wasn't such a big shift for them. But with diagnostics, they've had a longer transition period. They've had 5 years instead of 3. And you've just said that the MDR came out last year. That's because it was delayed because of COVID, so it had an extra year. But diagnostic companies, the shift is much, much greater because so many of these diagnostics are being up classified, so that they're falling into much higher risk classifications. So it means that they're going to have to jump through a lot more regulatory and quality compliance hoops. And it's a complete culture change to these companies. So they needed that time to start getting their head around it. And it's a company-wide thing. You can't just have one or two individuals who achieve the compliance. It's company-wide. And they've all got to embrace it and work together in order to be fully compliant with the incoming regulations. And all of that takes time. And also, a lot of diagnostic companies are going to need to hire in extra resource, whether it's employees or consultants. So all of that, again, takes time, and being able to map out how to achieve compliance under the regulation. Again, it's all time. And of course, time is money.
Okay, so definitely yes. So they have a long way to go, and while the transition period is so much extended for the diagnostics, would you be able to give us some quick highlights on what's happening right now and what dates should the manufacturers keep in mind?
Yeah. So if we can just bring up a slide that will show the actual key dates. So I know that the sector were hoping and maybe perhaps praying that the IVDR application date would be postponed in a similar way to the MDR one. But no, definitely not. But there has been a compromise in that the application date is still the 26th of May 2022, but it's a soft application date. And so this slide actually demonstrates that as from the 26th of May, the IVDR will apply to all new diagnostics and also to the Class A non-sterile diagnostics. And Class A non-sterile is because they're the lowest risk classification. Okay, so they should be the easiest ones to be able to reach or achieve compliance with the new regulation. Even though there's going to be a delay to the other risk classifications becoming fully compliant, in fact, all IVDs, as from the 26th of May, must be compliant with the vigilance and post-market surveillance requirements of the new IVD regulation. So it's not a case of postponing it to, for example, if you're a Class D, postponing everything to the 26th of May 2025, which seems like ages away. But 3 years and it will go by in a flash. I can tell you, because there's a lot of work to do in the interim. So the key dates, you can see it's all falling on the 26th of May, but then you've got 2025, 2026 for your Class C devices, and 2027 for your Class A sterile and your Class B. So these are very key dates that legal manufacturers must be aware of and must work towards in order to be fully compliant.
Okay, that's interesting. So I'm sure this timeline will definitely help all the audiences plan their regulatory strategy accordingly. And if you don't mind, would you pull up the screen once again so that people can quickly take screenshots if they are interested, and they can save it for their later use. So yes, here is the screen. Thanks for sharing it again. So for all the audience members, these are the key dates for compliance for your IVD regulations. So make sure you have all of these deadlines assigned with you. And if you have any questions, feel free to connect with the experts on MDD panel or on GRS and company network. So, well, yes, with all the things that's revolving around, you also mentioned something about it is a company-wide process and everyone needs to make sure they are compliant. So, were there any new roles added in the medtech ecosystem because of IVD regulations?
Lots of new rules. Far too many to go into here. But I think it's important to recognise why we've got these new regulations, and because a lot of people say, well, what is regulatory affairs? Why bother? But actually, the governments were keen to protect the safety of the public. That's what it boils down to. And there is a requirement for the regulation. They wanted regulations to ensure quality, safety, and efficacy of these devices, of these diagnostics. And it's in that order: quality, safety, efficacy. So quality, you've already mentioned about, company-wide. So that would be quality management systems. How do you operate? How do you control things? How do you mitigate risk? So that's your quality. Safety is very much the safety of the diagnostic itself. So is it safe to use? You need to test it to ensure that it is safe to use. So, for example, okay, this is a medical device, but the one that comes to mind is the EpiPen, for anaphylaxis. So it's something that it looks like a pen, and you put your thumb on the top, and so it clicks. And when you click it, the needle comes out. So what you do is you jam it into your thigh, which is the biggest muscle, press the button, needle comes out, injects you, and you're okay, you're safe. Okay. What they found in the early days that people were holding the pen the wrong way round. And so they jab it into their thigh, click, and actually stab their thumb with the needle. So not very safe. So they had to come up with a way of making sure that people could identify which was the right way round. So things like that. So that's your safety. And efficacy is the final bit, which is about proving your claims. So whatever you say about the diagnostic is supported by evidence. Now, if you think about Theranos, that was in the news all over the place. Multi-billion-dollar company, made all sorts of claims about being able to take one blood test and diagnose all sorts of different cancers, but there was no evidence to support that, and they got found out. And the CEO, has been taken to court over it, and so everything's sort of gone a bit pear-shaped. And it's because of those kind of companies that we've now got these new regulations to tighten control. Now, unlike pharmaceutical companies, with diagnostics, they are often made up of several different components. And the legal manufacturer is the company that places the final product onto the European market, but they don't necessarily make it all from scratch. So they could be getting components from like China, India, Australia, US, and putting it all together. But someone else, the contract manufacturer, could actually put it together. And then the legal manufacturer puts their name to it and places it on the market. So under the regulations, the legal manufacturer is responsible for that whole supply chain. So what the regulation has done is that they've made the legal manufacturer more accountable, but they've also defined the different economic operators in that supply chain so that they understand their role and responsibility more. So when I say economic operators, that's your legal manufacturer, who's like the top of the chain. But you also have importers and distributors. So what is their role and responsibility? You have the suppliers of the components. So you need, as the legal manufacturer, the supplier of the component, you must do your due diligence on them. You must have a quality agreement in place so that you can ensure the quality of the component that is going into your diagnostic, and then you're able to confirm the full quality of that diagnostic. And then you've got the very early stages of, when people are designing the device, the diagnostic. So, are they designing it to the requirements of the new regulation? Are they designing it in such a way that you can record the evidence, put it into a design history file, which will then go into the technical file, which, if you need a notified body, is going to be reviewed by the notified body. So it goes all the way through. And then if you've got a non-EU legal manufacturer who wants to sell into Europe, but they don't want to set up their own legal entity, but there is a way of being able to do that, and that is to appoint an EU authorised representative. Now, under the new regulation, it's no longer a post box, and the EU authorised representative does have legal obligations which are equal to the legal manufacturer. So that means that if anything goes wrong with the diagnostic on the European market, then the EU authorised representative is equally liable with the legal manufacturer for that diagnostic. So that's going to be quite a headache for a number of EU authorised reps. And already, Jay, I know that quite a few EU authorised reps have pulled out of the market. Previously, there were one-man bands, quite a few of them. And they just can't afford the insurance and the costs and the extra legal responsibility. So I can understand why they're pulling out. But Medidia does offer that service. So and we've looked into this in great detail and put a lot of time and effort in making sure we can provide a full service. And then the last role, which is completely new to IVDR, is the person responsible for regulatory compliance. Interestingly, there isn't much explanation in the regulation, so I think it will come out in time as to what the requirements are. But if you are a micro or small company, you can outsource that role. So the authorities have recognised that to recruit someone into that role full time, because they must be continuously at your disposal. So basically, you must have access to them 24/7. So So to be able to recruit someone into that position in-house is very expensive, and is going to be cost prohibitive to these companies. But to outsource could be much more cost effective. So again, Medidia and GRS actually can provide the service of person responsible for regulatory compliance, and we meet all the qualification requirements and experience that are dictated by the regulation. So that's the other thing, you need to be careful, making sure that your PRRC has the right qualifications and experience, otherwise you'll be non-compliant. So those are your key areas. So that's basically your whole supply chain.
So yes, that's the end point that you mentioned out there. So a quick question that comes into my mind is how to make sure that you have the right person representing your business, because you have EOARs, you have PRRC, and so many importers, suppliers, and different people now defined under the regulations. So what should a manufacturer make sure to make sure about having the right persons representing their business and their devices?
Yeah, you really do need to go back to basics. You need to look at your whole supply chain and work out what the roles are. Now, some companies will think that we've had examples of this, with some of our clients. That they thought that they were just the importer, stroke distributor, and in fact they were. They had automatically become the EU authorised representative, which they weren't aware of. And that's because they hadn't appointed anyone. So you could, if you're an importer or a distributor, you could unwittingly automatically become someone's EU authorised representative in the eyes of the law. So as the legal manufacturer, you've got to go through your whole supply chain and identify and confirm the role of each economic operator and understand what their obligations are under the regulation. And it's a team thing. The legal manufacturer doesn't necessarily dictate to the rest of their supply chain. They need to walk through it and talk through it with everybody in that supply chain and reach agreement as to what the roles and responsibilities are. But at the end of the day, the overall responsibility is on the legal manufacturer. So they've got to get it right, and they've got to make sure that they do their due diligence on everyone in that supply chain. And if they've got a really good relationship with one of the all of the economic operators, hopefully, but if one of them is not not quite up to standard in terms of complying with maybe they don't have a very robust quality management system, well then the legal manufacturer can provide them with support to improve in that area and give them the opportunity to improve in that area. But I think the writing is on the wall at the moment with quality management systems in particular, that everyone, just about everyone in the supply chain will need to be compliant with ISO 13485 2016. That is the standard for quality management systems in medtech. And it's going to be, it's a way of building confidence with your customers that you are developing and producing good quality, safe products. And if you don't have it, I'm afraid what will happen is your customers will go and find someone who does have 13485 accreditation. So that's something, if you haven't got it now, even if you're a very low risk classification device, you really need to be looking at 13485 and working towards compliance.
That's quite interesting to know, and I'm sure now all the manufacturers have a big to-do list that they need to tick off. So yes, and again, if anyone, any of those manufacturers who are watching us live right now, or maybe if you are going to watch the recorded version, if you need any regulatory support, feel free to contact us. And we will be there to be your regulatory risk partners for medical devices, diagnostics, and digital health. And definitely our resource partners, whom you can see they are flashing down there. They are out into the medtech space and providing you with additional expertise apart from regulatory affairs. So yes, indeed, it's going to be quite tough and challenging, but it looks like to be interesting times. Now, Greer, before I move to the next question, which I have, If any of our audiences have any more thoughts or questions that they wish to get answers from, make sure you mention them in the comments box, because this comment box is quite regularly monitored, and I would like to pull up those questions when time arises. So don't feel shy and ask your questions. You never know, you might get the best answer. So yes. Okay, so Greer, let's consider a company is on day zero and they haven't prepared for the IVDR transition. What are their first steps?
Oh goodness, they've got a long journey ahead of them. I've got to say, actually, if you are an entrepreneur just starting out now, or you're just spinning out a company, maybe from a bigger company or from university, you're probably in a better situation than existing diagnostic companies. And that's because you're already aware of the IVD regulation. You haven't got into the habit of complying with the old directive, which was very light touch. So for those companies, it's going to be much easier to start from scratch by considering the IVD regulation. I mean, my answer is just about the same for both situations, because you've got the ones just starting out on their journey, but then we've got existing companies. How are they going to transition over from directive to regulation? And basically, it's a roadmap. You need to go back and revisit all your diagnostics, or if you're new, consider your diagnostic. And the first thing you need to do is revisit the risk classification. So if you remember earlier, I was talking about under the directives, it was a list-based approach. But under the regulation, it's a rule-based approach. So very, very different. So now you've got to look at your intended purpose statement. You've got to look at the complexity of the diagnostic. You've got to look at, where is it going to be used? Is it going to be used in the home? Is it in primary care, or is it in the hospital? Is it in a lab? So the environment is equally important in determining your risk classification. So this roadmap, what will happen is you've got to revisit, or you've got to look at what your diagnostic is, determine the risk classification. And I really would recommend getting someone outside of the company doing this. And this is because they will be purely objective. Now, it would be lovely if you came to Medidia or GRS for that support. But, anyone outside the company who has the regulatory knowledge, you can look objectively and assess your diagnostics against the risk classification, then you'll know that you'll get it right. Too often companies say, I want my diagnostic to be self-declared. Well, I want doesn't necessarily mean that's the reality. And you could get caught out by the authorities, especially with these new regulations, because the authorities are going to be keeping a close eye on what's happening in the sector. And they will be wanting and ensuring and working towards companies being fully compliant. So once you've got your risk classification, then what happens is it actually sorts out your regulatory pathway. So you understand which requirements apply directly to your diagnostic and which standards. So you've got the regulation itself, but there are standards as well that you need to comply with. And there are even national standards that you need to be aware of as well. So you need to assess the diagnostic classification, then assess the technical documentation that you have, identify if there are any gaps, and then determine how you're going to address those gaps. So you're building up it's almost like a portfolio, I suppose. So you're building up this portfolio, which will end up being your technical file, which if you're self-declaring, that's fine. You just have it ready and available for if you are audited, inspected by the authorities. Or if you're wanting to or need to engage with a notified body, then obviously that will be presented to your notified body for their review, along with your quality management system. Now, don't forget the quality management system. It's not all about your diagnostics. The quality management system will underpin everything you do in the company. So you need to look at that as well. And none of this is just, ticking a box and saying, oh, I comply, put it on the shelf, and, the file just gathers dust. This is, it's a dynamic process. It's proactive. You've got to be constantly monitoring. You're monitoring internally, but also externally. So you're seeing how your diagnostic is performing in the real world. And that's what your post-market surveillance is all about. And you're watching out for any trends. Hopefully you won't see any nasty trends, but if you do, then there's a whole process that you have to deal with. So, like you say, if you're starting from zero, either in terms of launching a new diagnostic because you're an entrepreneur, or day zero because you still haven't transitioned to the IVDR, then you do need a roadmap. So do your assessment and then get your roadmap, and then that provides you and your company structure, and basically it signposts you in what you need to do when, and how, and also who is going to do it.
Yes, okay. Well, if I was asked this question in some other platform, my immediate answer would be, well, you need to go on and type www.medidia.com, and our experts will be there to help you out. So be it a day zero or be it your any day where you would need any regulatory assistance, definitely our experts at Medidia, at GRS, and also our resource partners, all of us are here to help companies make sure they navigate these regulations effectively. So these regulations are nothing to be scared of if you have a very strategic and a robust partnership with your regulatory risk partners. So yes, at Medidia, we believe in all these factors. Okay, so moving on. So quite recently, I was interacting with few other similar organizations and some of their clients and different cluster organizations. And many big organizations were claiming that the lack of notified bodies is causing a delay in their applications. What are your immediate views on this?
Yeah, and this is actually one of the reasons why we've got a soft application date for IVDR, because we've got so few EU notified bodies who are designated under IVDR. And for those of you who don't know what that means, designated means that they've been inspected and authorized to be able to review technical files and quality management systems as per the IVD regulation. That the whole pool of notified bodies in Europe has decreased dramatically anyway. But at the moment, I think we may have got another one very recently, but we've got about 3 notified bodies. 6 notified bodies, get it right, 6 notified bodies in Europe who are designated under the IVDR. Now, that doesn't mean that you can go to all 6 and say, give me a quote and I go with the best one. You've got to plan for that. And that's actually part of the roadmap that I was talking about earlier, is as soon as you, and this is actually more for the entrepreneurs who are just, developing their diagnostics. But as soon as you're looking at your regulatory pathway, you need to be talking to those European notified bodies. And how do you know if they're designated under IVDR? Well, if you search on NANDO, NANDO, so that's N for November, N for November again, DO in capitals. If you Google that, it comes up with a listing of those EU notified bodies who are designated under the IVDR. But not only that, it will also state what their areas of specialty are. So what you're looking for is you're looking for a notified body who specializes in the type of technology that you have developed and you want to place onto the market. It's much easier to engage and talk to a notified body who understands what you're doing. And then your conversations with your authorities are much, much easier. But the other thing that you need to establish is that EU notified body taking on new clients, because a number of them are not. So, you know, we have clients who have contacted all the notified bodies and they either are not taking on new clients, or there's such a long lead-in time that it's just making it impossible to be able to launch. And you know, that's, like I said, that's why we've now got this soft approach to the application of the IVDR, because the authorities realise that with you know, there are all sorts of reasons why you know, that the EU notified bodies are not ready, and one of them actually is COVID. Now, COVID, the pandemic, on the one hand, has been good for diagnostic companies because everyone, thankfully, has, you know, rallied around trying to find solutions to you know, battle with this pandemic, and that's been fantastic. And lots of innovations have happened, and we've had fast track authorizations to get diagnostics and other devices onto the market. But it also means, on the other hand, that the notified bodies have been very busy trying to deal with all these new diagnostics, and you know, they're just so stretched. They don't have the resource, they don't have the time at the moment. So, you know, I mean, we're finding it can take 3-6 months just to get a quote. So, you know, these companies, if you need a notified body, you've got to be talking to them, reaching out to them now. Even if you're not ready to place your device on the market, or to get your technical files reviewed, talk to them now, because they are going to be your rate limiting factor.
And irrespective of the status of how many notified bodies do we have and how prepared are they, is there anything that, like, along with assessing all of their documents, is there anything else that manufacturers should be fully prepared before they go and knock the doors of notified bodies?
Yes, I'm going to go back to your quality management system. You know, the emphasis now from with the incoming regulation is managing your risk. So you've always got to think about, you know, what if the worst happens? And of course, the worst case scenario with a diagnostic is misdiagnosis, which could cause the wrong treatment, the wrong therapy for a patient, which in turn causes death, so fatalities. That's your worst case scenario. So you've got to be able to demonstrate that you've mitigated all that risk. And don't be afraid of asking yourselves, you know, the what if, the worst case scenarios. So concentrate very much on the risk. Also for diagnostics, I think a shift that's happened or being brought in by the regulation is the performance evaluation reports. Now, notice I said performance evaluation reports. Your performance evaluation reports actually refers to the performance of the diagnostic in use, when it was being developed, if there are any similar diagnostics out in the market that has published literature. You can use all of that to support the performance of your diagnostic, but you may well need to have a performance study, and that's something else that you need to make sure that you've planned for and allowed time and money for. If you're not sure if you need to run a study, then engage with your notified body, and that's part of your preparation. Your notified body is going to be on a very long journey with you, and you need to build up that relationship. You need to build confidence in each other. It's a two-way street, but you need to have absolute trust in each other as well. So be directed by your notified body, but also at the same time, be prepared to challenge or question what they're asking you to do, because you are the experts of your technology. And it may be that you know almost better than the notified body, but you can justify, you can provide evidence as to why you should be doing something or not doing something. And if you can present that argument to the notified body, then very often, well, they will listen, but they will have the bigger picture as well with regulatory requirements. So it's very much engaging with your notified body early on and entering into discussions with them, so that you understand their expectations, you take on board their guidance, and you develop and you become compliant with the regulations in line with what they have said, in line with your discussions with them. So hopefully when it comes to the actual review of your technical file and your quality management system, there won't be any nasty surprises, because you'll have ironed it all out beforehand, and it will just be small things. So you don't want to just do everything and then turn up on the doorstep of a notified body and go, here you go, look at this. It's a journey together. And I can't emphasize that more, strongly enough. It really is a journey together, and you are building a long-term relationship with these guys, so you want to make it work.
Yes, so definitely notified bodies will play an important role in this entire journey. And again, if any of our audiences or someone might require any support for regulatory affairs in the medtech space or for diagnostics, don't forget to log on to www.medidia.com, and our experts will be there to help you out. Well, again, thank you so much, Greer, for all. That's all part of the questions from today. So there are no more questions with which I'm going to grill this barbecue, but definitely we will be talking more in detail on clinical requirements in tomorrow's session. So here is a little update for all our audiences that tomorrow we are going live again at 11 a.m. Tomorrow, that is 26th April, Tuesday. We are going live at 11 a.m. British Summer Time, and we will be in talks with Liz Tooley, who is a managing partner at Xenon Health Solutions, one of our resource partners for the IVDR Celebration Week. And we are going to talk about IVDR and the clinical requirements for IVD manufacturers in the European Union. So again, for all our audiences, if you think this is interested for you, or someone might be interested, make sure you share the links with them. We are broadcasting this live on LinkedIn, YouTube, and on Facebook. So you can find us by a simple hashtag, that is a hashtag IVDR ready, and all our session details will be with you on 3 different platforms. Well, yes, that's all about the session for tomorrow. And for today, overview of IVDR. Is there anything else that you would like to mention to our audiences before we wind up today's session?
Yes, there is actually, Jay. I think too many people are frightened or fearful or suspicious of regulations, but regulations really can be your friend. And I am absolutely passionate about helping companies to understand how complying with regulations can actually form the foundation of a very, very successful business, and it will contribute to the bottom line. So it may feel painful, and it may feel, that there's the authorities lurking over your shoulder, but actually we really are here to help. And we, the whole purpose of these compliance requirements is to ensure that we are producing good quality, safe devices, diagnostics, and that they work. And they're here for all of us. We're all patients, we're all users, and we have friends and families. And so just think to the future and think, I'm going to produce really good quality diagnostics for the benefit of others. And to do that, you're compliant with the regulations. And I think, that's basically it. That's the gold standard. Be compliant and you will be successful.
Yeah, that's a very good takeaway message for all our audiences. And yes, we are here to help you navigate all the regulatory challenges that you might face. And don't be scared of regulations. I'm sure my colleagues are here to help you out with them. Well, yes, that's it for today. And see you all again tomorrow at 11 a.m. British Summer Time. And we will be talking about IVDR and the clinical requirements for IVD manufacturers in the European Union with our resource partner from Xenon Health Solution, Liz Tully, who is the managing partner of that company. And we will be again back with Greer, Liz, and me hosting this entire session for IVDR Celebration Week, making sure that you are hashtag IVDR ready. So yes, that's it for today. And if you guys have any questions, drop them on mdd@mddltd.com. And we would like to pull them up in the upcoming sessions, or if possible, our experts will give you and reply back with the emails. So that's it for today. And yes, have a very good evening. Thank you so much, Greer, for your time and your insights in this session. We have a long journey to go throughout this week, so I'll give you a big thank you towards the end. And yes, so see you soon again tomorrow. And that's it for today.